There's a truth so powerful that if you truly understand it, it will change how you see every storm, every success, every delay, and every decision in your life. And that truth is this: God is sovereign. He reigns over everything, from galaxies that spin billions of miles away to the smallest thought that crosses your mind. Nothing happens outside his control. Nothing slips past his eyes. Every heartbeat, every sunrise, every door that opens or closes, all are under his sovereign hand. Yet in this divine order, there's a mystery we often wrestle with. If God controls everything, then what about us? What's our role? Do our choices matter? The Bible gives a clear, humbling, and hope-filled answer. God's sovereignty doesn't cancel human responsibility. It defines it. You see, God's sovereignty is not a prison that limits you. It's the foundation that frees you. When you know that the God who created the universe is in control of every detail of your life, you can finally stop living in fear and start walking in faith. That's where your most important responsibility begins: to trust, obey, and surrender your will to his. Because while God's plan will never fail, the way you respond to him determines how you experience that plan in your life. When you wake up in the morning, God already knows what this day holds. He's seen your struggles, your temptations, your victories, and even your mistakes. Yet he invites you to walk with him, not as a puppet, but as a partner in purpose. Think about it. God didn't make robots. He made people with free will, capable of choosing love, truth, and obedience. And that choice, your choice, carries eternal weight. It's your responsibility to align your will with his, to trust his sovereignty even when you don't understand his strategy. Many people live frustrated because they try to control what God has already claimed authority over. They fight for outcomes instead of trusting his orchestration. The irony is, peace comes not when you have control, but when you finally surrender it. Look at Joseph in the Bible, betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused, and imprisoned from a human point of view. His life looked like one tragedy after another. But Joseph understood something deeper. God was in control, even in the chaos. He told his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." That's sovereignty in motion. Man acts, but God overrules. Joseph didn't need to manipulate his situation. His responsibility was to stay faithful, to trust God even in the dark, and to do what was right no matter how wrong things looked. And that's exactly what God calls us to do today. You can't always see what he's doing, but you can always choose to obey him in the meantime. The tension between God's sovereignty and our responsibility is not a contradiction, it's a divine cooperation. God writes the script, but he invites you to play your part. When you disobey, he doesn't lose control. He simply redirects your path, sometimes through pain, to bring you back to his purpose. It's like a GPS recalculating your route after a wrong turn. You can delay his will for your life, but you can't destroy it. Your greatest responsibility is not to figure out everything, but to remain faithful to the one who already has. Every day, you're faced with choices to trust or to doubt, to forgive or to hold grudges, to follow his word or follow the world. These decisions might seem small, but they echo through eternity. God's sovereignty ensures that nothing you surrender to him is ever wasted. Even your failures become part of his design when you return to him in humility. Sometimes people say, if God's in control, then why pray? Why serve? Why even try? The answer is simple: because God's sovereignty works through your obedience. Prayer doesn't change God's will. It aligns your heart with his. Service doesn't earn his favor. It reflects your gratitude. Effort doesn't replace grace, it proves faith. Imagine a farmer who knows that God controls the rain and the sun. Does that mean he sits idle, waiting for crops to grow? No, he plows, plants, and waters in faith, trusting God to bring the harvest. That's how life works under divine sovereignty. You do your part, and God does what only he can do. Even Jesus, who was fully God and fully man, lived under this truth. In Gethsemane, facing the cross, he prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." That's the perfect picture of responsibility meeting sovereignty, surrender without resistance, obedience without hesitation, trust without conditions. Because real faith is not proven in comfort, but in surrender. When you say, "God, I don't understand, but I still trust you," heaven takes notice. That moment of submission is where divine power meets human weakness, and that's where transformation begins. In your life, there will be seasons when God's sovereignty feels confusing. Maybe you prayed for healing, but the sickness remained. Maybe you worked hard, but the door stayed shut. Maybe you begged for restoration, but the relationship fell apart. It's in those moments that your responsibility becomes the hardest, to keep believing, to keep obeying, to keep walking when you can't see the road ahead. Yet that's exactly when your faith shines the brightest. Because trusting God when everything makes sense is easy. Trusting him when nothing does is worship. You may not realize it, but your every decision either draws you closer to God's will or distances you from it. He will never force you to obey him. He invites you, he pursues you, he waits for you. That's why the Bible says, choose this day whom you will serve. Your choices matter because they reveal who sits on the throne of your heart. God's sovereignty is absolute, but he honors your response. That's the beauty of divine love. It doesn't enslave, it empowers. When you understand this balance, fear begins to fade. You stop worrying about outcomes because you know the author. You stop blaming yourself for every setback because you trust his redirection. You stop fighting for control because you realize that peace isn't found in having your way, it's found in trusting his way. Even the devil's schemes are limited by God's permission. Job's story proves it. Satan could only go as far as God allowed, and even then, every attack became a setup for restoration. Your responsibility, like Job's, is to hold on, not because you see the ending, but because you know the one writing it. So today, if your life feels uncertain, remember this. God's sovereignty is not an excuse to give up. It's a reason to stand firm. Keep praying even when answers are slow. Keep forgiving even when it hurts. Keep obeying even when it's unpopular. You are not a victim of random circumstances. You are a vessel of divine purpose. Every delay, every detour, every disappointment is working together for your good, because the God who holds the stars in place is holding your story too. Your most important responsibility, then, is simple yet profound: to trust God fully and obey him completely. Not halfway, not when it's convenient, not when it's easy, but always. The world tells you to follow your heart. God tells you to follow his word. The world says control your destiny. God says surrender your destiny to me. And when you do, you'll find freedom, not fear. You'll find peace, not panic. You'll find meaning in moments that once made no sense. So wherever you are right now, maybe you're standing in the middle of confusion, maybe you're waiting for an answer, maybe you're tired of the fight, remember this truth. God's sovereignty guarantees that nothing in your life is wasted, and your responsibility ensures that your faith keeps it fruitful. When those two realities meet, his power and your obedience, miracles happen. Doors open, mountains move, lives change, because when you trust the one who controls everything, you stop fearing anything. That's the heartbeat of faith. Resting in his sovereignty and rising to your responsibility. Trust him, obey him, and let your life tell the story that God is in control and you are at peace in his hands. That's not weakness, that's worship. That's not surrendering defeat, that's walking in divine design. So breathe deep, lift your head, and say it with confidence. God, you are sovereign, my life is yours.